Okay, I'm going to reflect on a research paper I read a while ago while I was writing a dissertation on behavior and the influence of genes and the environment on behavior. I read a research paper, it was a 2004 research paper by McGill University. It was led by researchers Weaver, Cervoni, Champagne, D'Alessio, Sharma, Seckl, Dymov, Szyf and Meaney. And it was a really interesting article, research paper, and if you get a chance to read it, really fascinating. And the research was quite interesting because it involved rats, and basically what the rats did, you had high licking rats and lower licking rats of their offspring. So you had, on one hand, in a rat environment, when the pup is born, you've got rats who nurture their pups by high licking, and you've got rats that are low licking, and you've got obviously a spectrum and somewhere in between. And that's the human equivalent of nurturing, when the mother nurtures the baby. And it's really interesting correlation because they found that they got a group of rats and they segregated them with high licking rats and low licking rats. And the rats weren't their biological mother, they were fostered. And what's really fascinating is that the group of rats that were paired with the low licking rats showed a correlation of behavior years after, of more anxious, more aggressive, more in terms of their sexual behavior, different behaviors. And you had the rats that were nurtured by the high licking rats, they were more calmer, they were more non-aggressive behaviorally, even into their adulthood when the mothers had long gone. And that was really interesting because it showed that the nurturing that the mother did in the first week has a huge impact on her pup's epigenetics well into adulthood. And that's quite interesting really, because we obviously are given a set of genes, and the environment, according to this research and other research, has an impact on the expression of those genes. From a point of view of genes, there's a complexity in genetic architecture, although there are biological mechanisms and the correlation of the environmental stimulus, and it's almost like a light switch. It's like turning a light. There are environmental factors, it could be nutritional factors, and in this situation the factors was nurturing. And from the human point of view, human being point of view, what does that relate to? How does that relate to us? Then it shows how important nurturing is as early as possible, and the influence of nurturing. Now, needless to say, my reflection on the research, I wouldn't suggest it's deterministic, because you could argue that some people come from all sorts of environments and they develop in different ways. Because you could say on one hand there are people who come from a very nurtured environment and they go on to display aggressive behavior and so on and so forth. So there's many other correlations, and it's multifactorial. And people grow up in harsh environments that aren't nurtured and go on to be very balanced, calm, and I don't know to the extent in this experiment, other experiments that are similar involving animal models, what the correlations are, but I would say it's more probabilistic, and I suppose it's something that we sort of intuitively know anyway. The more nurturing the environment, the better chance we've got behaviorally from that point of view. But I think the fascinating thing for me is I'm certainly no expert in epigenetics, it's not my field, yet I've read many articles, I've read hundreds of articles in the literature, and I use those articles to further my own knowledge and to cherry pick what's right for me in my expertise and profession. So it's quite a fascinating area. And I think what's quite fascinating is that, okay, we've got these sort of genes that we're given, and I suppose certain genes that predispose to certain situations, but this goes to show that we can't influence our genes by outside influences. And, you know, going another story for another day, and this could apply to nutrition, to general environment, to exposure to different situations, and that can have an impact on our gene and ultimately our behavior and other components of our experience and emotions, so on and so forth. So I would suggest that if you get time to read the paper, it's a really fascinating paper, and I suppose from the point of view, from a human experience, it shows how important love is. So, and if you weren't in an environment that was loving early on in your life, then who's to say by starting with self-love or getting yourself in environments where you feel love and gratification and gratitude and altering things like our nutrition and looking at the environment that we're in and how that factors how we feel and our behave, and who's to say that it can't influence certain factors about ourselves. And certainly from this research suggests the earlier the better, but one thing that's probably not as conclusive is that if you didn't receive it then maybe now there still could be an opportunity to express certain genes, like a light switch in a room where the light could be off and it could be dormant and we could switch it on, and we've got the light shining, so to speak. So it is a fascinating research, and I think for me the big takeaways from the research, the three big takeaways for me are that we're not necessarily predetermined genetically. There is an opportunity for us to change, and that change could come across by being in a certain environment. The other big takeaway for me is that love and compassion, and probably the best place to start is ourselves. If we feel love and we give love, then there's a very good correlation to ourselves being more calmer and at peace. It's not the only thing, and these things are multifactorial. And I think the third big takeaway for me is that there's always hope, and I think that one of the reasons epigenetics is a potential game changer is because we're going to learn a lot more about the way our genes interact with the environment and how we can make even the slightest degree in variation in a change and have a much different result. Live with passion. Boom.